recording?
Yes, we have 5 library trustees physically present, so we have a quorum at the Northside Library.
Great, thank you. First order of business is to take a look at the minutes of our September meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Actually, I think, Tony, first we would need to have the vote on remote participation.
Thank you.
It's just for you at this point. So because we are absent Martha and Thomas today, we would need a vote from someone in the room here to move that Tony can attend for reason A.
I so move.
Yeah, read it.
I move that Tony Townsend's request to attend today's meeting of the JMRL Board remotely due to a temporary or permanent disability or other medical condition that prevents physical attendance be approved.
Would you all care to vote?
Yeah, aye.
Okay, Tony, I believe that's it. You're good.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I would have called for a vote, but I thought that was be out of order too. So back to the minutes. Any additions, comments, or questions about the minutes of the September meeting? If not, could I have a motion to accept them as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, good. We'll move on to the announcements. Are there any announcements?
I have a nice announcement. Is that the lost the figure, but the book sale ended and the friends raised $337,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Bravo, that is wonderful.
Is that a record? That must be a record.
It is a record for a 10-day sale, yes.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, that's great news. That's great news. I saw some of the pictures of the lines at the old north side there. Made my heart warm. Gladdened my heart. So great.
Thank you, David, for helping out, coming, and your wife.
We just volunteered. It was
I
fun.
know.
Great fun.
All the volunteers.
Any other announcements? Okay. We'll move on to public comments, and I'd like to remind members of the public that public comments in front of the board are recorded, of course, and they are limited to 5 minutes. If we also encourage members of the public who may be attending virtually to go onto the library's website where there is a comment form that they can also use in addition to attending the meeting. So for our first commenter, I believe we have
I've got we have a guest online as well, Tony. It's Candy McGarry, who is the administrator for Nelson County, who's got her hand. If you don't mind, if we could let Candy speak briefly.
that would be great.
Oops, wasn't sure if I was actually participating in the meeting, so I was just trying to get someone's attention.
Candy, welcome. Welcome. So this is the monthly meeting of the JMRL Library Board, and you know Alita, of course, who's your representative on the board.
Yes, hello.
If you've got anything to say, now's the chance.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much. I'm just glad I'm finally actually in the meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, Candy.
Thanks, Candy. We have anybody else online, David, before we go to public, the members of the public in the audience?
If anybody online would like to make a comment, you can raise your hand now. Otherwise, I do have someone signed up, Mr. Robert Turner, in person to make a comment.
I think we can hear from Mr. Turner.
Oh, you know what? I need battery.
Green light.
Mr. Turner, let me, before you start, put a battery in there.
Oh, okay.
take a seat. Then we can get started in 5 minutes. Go ahead.
You hear me okay? Yes, that's good.
Yep.
My name is Robert Turner. I recently retired after 32 years as a professor at the University of Virginia, where I taught in both the law school and the Department of Politics, but it was the Government and Foreign Affairs Department. I started studying Thomas Jefferson more than 50 years ago and became a serious Jefferson scholar. Indeed, in 2000 and 2001, I was chosen to chair the Jefferson Hemming Scholars Commission, a group of more than a dozen senior professors from around the country, some pro-Jefferson, some anti-Jefferson. We spent a year looking at every bit of evidence. We had as members 2 former presidents of the New England Political Science Association, the former chair of the government department at Harvard, people who had taught at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Chicago, Virginia, Brown, some of the finest schools in the country. We spent a year looking at every bit of evidence and we concluded the story is not true. We issued a more than 400-page report with more than 1,400 footnotes that looked at every issue, and it has largely been ignored. We have several people have tried to set up debates with the leading scholars and what you might call the pro-fraternity camp. Not one has been willing to debate. The American Political Science Association tried to set up a debate in 2002. No one would debate. The book, Master of the Mountain, the very critical of Jefferson, described me as Jefferson's chief academic defender. I'm not sure that's true, but I was flattered at the thought. When you had your July meeting, I was in the hospital having in fact, I was having surgery as you met, and I was not able to come. I submitted a fairly lengthy statement with lots of footnotes, asking that it be shared with the board. I got an email back saying it would be put on the internet where board members could find it. I was never able to find it. If anyone is interested, I'll be happy to provide a copy of it. The great irony here is that Ms. Anderson and her colleagues are correct in their criticism of slavery, in their sincerity, and in their belief that people who own slaves ought not be honored, at least not for that purpose. There are very few perfect people in the world, and some of our great heroes had flaws. I don't know if you've seen the released FBI reports on Dr. Martin Luther King, but it turns out he had some fairly serious shortcomings, and yet he was a great American because he had the courage to stand up to the George Wallaces and Bull Cotters and other tyrants, and he made great progress. I think what he did primarily was what Gandhi did. Gandhi did not defeat the British. Gandhi got the British media to tell the British people what was going on in India, and the British people demanded changes. And in the same way, thanks to television, people in America who had no idea how bad things were in the South saw pictures of Bull Connors and his German shepherds and fire hoses attacking innocent protesters, and they said that's unacceptable. And they protested to Congress, and Congress quickly and overwhelmingly passed civil rights acts. Now, Jefferson's record, ironically, is among the most admirable of people in his era. The editor of Thomas Paine's papers, and the editor was a Marxist, admitted Marxist, who also wrote a multi-volume set of the papers of Frederick Douglass and many others. He said that Paine is often called America's first abolitionist, but in fact, that title more properly belongs to Thomas Jefferson. John Quincy Adams wrote in a British abolitionist newspaper in 1823 that on the list of American abolitionists, second only behind the name of George Washington, is the name of Thomas Jefferson. In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson said, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. The Almighty has no attribute which can take sides with us in such a struggle. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, in his Bill of Particulars against King George, denounced him for taking a people who had done him no harm and transporting them across the ocean into slavery.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your comments.
Great.
Kristen, I'm gonna see if somebody else wants to speak.
No, I'm here to observe.
Very good. Anybody else online, David?
I don't believe so. If anyone online would like to make a public comment, you can raise your hand now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Next item of business is trustee continuing education, and we have a presentation from Meredith Dickens, who's our collections manager.
And I also make a note that in what is now becoming an ongoing event, it is Meredith's birthday today.
Oh my God.
Hi, all right.
Yeah,
Happy
tradition
birthday.
of staff members. being invited to speak on this.
Yes, Brittany also had to speak on her birthday. So all staff now have to let me know when their birthday is, and then they have to come speak to the board.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Very generous.
I think there is fine, yeah. And there is a mic if you'd like one.
I will speak loudly, but do let me know if I trail off and need to repeat myself. I'll try not use the mic. So I've been asked to speak for a request for reconsideration. This is a topic that is on the mind of every librarian in the country these days. If you paid attention last month during, or if you were aware last month, during Banned Books Week, which is the American Library Association's annual effort to bring awareness to censorship and issues. They released numbers that challenges to inclusion of books in libraries and schools and public libraries this year have been an unprecedented number. So it's an issue on all of our minds. And I'm going to speak today just about how JMRL views the reconsideration process and our procedure. And I'll happy to take questions at the end. So any member of our public readership has input into the library collection on both ends, on as it's developed and materials are selected, and also as the collection is managed. Because every library, every item in the library collection has a lifespan. We are an active moving collection. Things go in and they come out. And in terms of what is added to the collection, we ask or we seek the input from our public readership and from our staff through the suggest to purchase form. And we also receive input and feedback through informal conversations. Frontline library staff talk to our users about what they're reading, what they want to see more of, what they really enjoyed, what they didn't really enjoy. And all of that feedback is reported to the selectors. I am a primary selector for adult materials in the library, the children's services manager, the juvenile materials, and young adult services. And we actively talk to all the frontline staff about what they're hearing about how the library collection is being used. And also, of course, our readers vote with their library cards. We keep track of circulation numbers, trends and topics that are seeing more usage or not seeing more usage. And we engage what is more useful and appealing to our current readership and make selection decisions based on that. And on the other end, we similarly select and take input on when an item is no longer useful or appealing to our readers. Because again, every item has a lifespan, we want to make sure that we are constantly evolving the collection to meet the needs of our community. So we always talk about staff, about how to evaluate whether a book or any other circulating item, a movie, a piece of music, an audiobook, is earning its place on the shelf. Because we have limited shelf space and limited resources, we constantly need to evaluate that. And because we are managing 500,000 items approximately, we have a rotating, we have a procedure whereby we routinely evaluate parts of the collection over time. So over time, every piece of the collection is evaluated. But sometimes, outside of that regular rotation, an item is called to our attention through a member of staff or the public that we can sort of, again, outside of that rotation, evaluate its place in the collection. The formal process for this is the request for reconsideration form. It's allowed by policy 4.24. And library staff, and there's a procedure as well that library staff are trained in when this policy is enacted. When a member of the public comes to us and asks us to consider an item's place in the collection. The procedure, I'm sorry, is helps mitigate. Sometimes this is an emotional issue for the people approaching the library and for the library staff accepting the input. And so we like to stress that to take this emotion out of it, right? The library staff is asked to be neither apologetic for having the material or defensive for the libraries for everyone. We don't at that point offer any judgment because it is a serious process to evaluate an item collection. We don't want to make a snap judgment. So the staff member is open and accepts the feedback in a neutral way, offers the information about our selection criteria, which I may have mentioned before. The policy 4.11 is the material selection policy, which guides all of our decisions about what should go into the collection. So anybody asking about why does the library have this book or item is given the information about the selection criteria, and that also includes reference to the ALA's right to the reader and other statements of intellectual freedom that the library enforces. And after that information, they're also saying, well, if you'd like to formally request that the library reconsider this item, there is a form to fill out and fill out. And some people fill it out right away and hand it in. Some people take it home and think about it and then fill it out and send it in later. And some folks at that point say, you know, this is enough information. We've had an informal conversation about it, and please send this feedback in. And we do accept that feedback from staff members all the time. Oh, I had somebody talking about this, and something in this book, you know, had their kid asking them some questions, and they had a conversation about it, or other things. They pass on those conversations off to the selectors, and we are aware of them. But when the formal form is filled out and submitted, it comes to me first. If it's the form, it does cover request for reconsideration for library programs, library displays, and library materials. But if it has to do with an item in the circulating collection, it comes to me. If it is a children's material or young adult material, I share it with the possible regional manager. And immediately we send a letter to the person who sent in the form saying, we've got the form. Thank you for your input. We do really appreciate the opportunity to reconsider this item, and we'll let you know. Because again, it's not an instantaneous decision that we make feature. We spend several weeks researching the item, researching its place in the community and the needs of the community and its place in the collection. Does it have a conversation with other things on the shelf? We look at its usage, we look at reviews, why was it added to the collection in the first place and when? How has it been used over time? And we talk to our colleagues, both in the library, maybe in local schools, maybe in other libraries across the state. We have resources in the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom, their official word, yes. And the VLA, the Virginia Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee, has resources for librarians for frequently challenged titles that we can go and see how other libraries handled reconsidering specific titles. After that, all of that information gathering and thinking about, again, a group of library staff come to a conclusion and we write a letter with a response. We have several options when we're considering any items placed in the collection. To remove the item, to move the item to a different context in the collection, which maintains access, but also, again, changes the context in which it could be found, or to do nothing and leave it where it is. And so we'll, and I can talk more about those in a minute, but that's what we'll do. We'll craft a response and send that out to the person who did that form. And after that, if that just is not satisfactory to the person who made the request, they do have the option to appeal to the library director. They would have a meeting with David, and talk over the matter. And if the matter is still not resolved, there is an option to appeal to the library boards. We would bring it this body and this one further. I can say our records retention policy allows me to keep records on these for 3 years. So anything beyond that is anecdotal. I've been in my job for 10 years now, this job. And when I started out, I think my first couple of years, we didn't get any formal requests for reconsideration. And always there's lots of informal conversation. After that, maybe 1 or 2 a year. And this year we had 6.
Oh.
It's a matter of interest that the titles that we've reconsidered this year at the request of members of the public have not been on the top 10 with respect to research reform, have not been on the top 10 frequently challenged. They've been a variety of reasons. But we have responded to them all. Some of them, as I said, we have moved classic children's literature that features outdated depictions and outdated viewpoints, but is still recognized for its place in literature canon, has been moved away from the children's picture book area to the literature stacks, where it's still, again, discoverable for anyone who wants to find it, but maybe the kids who are browsing the picture books find something that's more contemporary and a little more relevant to the world that they live in. We have moved an adult nonfiction book from a smaller branch to the larger branch, where it was, again, in conversation with items that was the topic of sexuality and religion, and the collection in the smaller branch was not broad enough to really offer a good conversation between multiple viewpoints. We moved it to the central library, where it was in amongst more of a context. And then there are some things where we decide that the book stays where it is. There was a request this year for a children's book on flag design, history of on the picture on the page of the history of Germany. It did have a picture of the Nazi flag and with the swastikas. It was in the context of the book. It was clearly meant for children. The book was designed to have a lot of good information about flag design. It was meant for older children, so that we left it in the children's collection, and it was an opportunity to talk to a family about the fact that our children's collection ranges from birth through 10 or 11 until they move on to young adults, and there is a very wide range of ages, and it is up to the family to decide what's appropriate. And so a lot of those conversations happen when we do requests for reconsideration. And I guess the takeaway is just that it's never one person's decision. It's never a personal opinion about whether the book belongs in the library or where it belongs in the library. We rely on a lot of good conversations. And I'm happy to take any questions. David.
I think I just wanted to reiterate for the library board, because you might get people coming to you that have questions about an item that's in the library, and somebody might get they might have a question about something that's in the library and go to an outside administrator from one of our jurisdictions, or they might call the governor's office. So there might be other forms that people will use rather than coming to the library. So as trustees, if you get requests or questions about what's in the library's collection, then now you're aware that yes, you will have a say in it if it gets to a point where the staff has reviewed, I have reviewed, and the patron still has questions. It will come to the library board, but it should start with that form, so you can send them back to any JMRL branch and say, yep, we have a policy and a procedure in place for that, and we'd love to hear your voice, so please take a few minutes to fill that out. And I can also make some of those copies available for you if you want to keep them in your wallet or your purse to hand out.
Yes. Can you speculate a bit, or offer your professional assessment on what does it mean that the Charlottesville community, our region, the JMRL region, does have books that have been challenged? but they don't reflect the national trend that's been described in BLA and ALA. Like, what does that say, you think, about our region in particular?
Very good question.
Just make up something, I'm sure you know. I mean, feel the
I would
answer
like
is
to
right.
say that that it reflects on the strength of our collection as well, if it's a little self-serving, but
No, that's good.
because we do strive to have something for everybody.
Yeah.
It's easier to find, you know, instead of seeing only the things that you might object to, you would see plenty of things for you and maybe recognize that, yeah, these are for me.
That's great answer. That's an award-winning answer. Every other year, it's not gonna have any issues.
It is something that we really look for, is just to make sure that we have a good balance and a wide variety that reflects the breadth of our community. We do serve quite a few different communities within our area, and we want to make sure to have materials that speak to all of them.
Great, thank you. Great answer.
We started at the same time when I was fast. I'd also just like to agree with or that's the approach that you're. I do think our culture, there's a lot of division and polarization, and I think as a library, and this is stated explicitly in our mission and values, the solution to that is to make sure, hey, you don't like this, we have this other stuff for you, and you can point everyone to that situation. So I think that's I'd like to also sort of kind of reinforce. I think we're on the right track if that's our approach. But that also applies, soapbox, to programming, what displays we have, other things than just what's on the shelves. It also applies to what gets surfaced by our staff, by things that we amplify. I do have one or two questions, but maybe Meredith.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean, it sounds a little at the surface that sort of we've gone up 3 times. You know, even one, two, that's 6. Yeah. But what is your feeling? I mean, if you've heard anything from other libraries in the state, are people also seeing jumps like that?
I don't have specific numbers from other public libraries. I do know that if you look at the news school libraries across the state have seen an increase in efforts from the community to have more influence and control over what books are on shelves across different libraries.
So more school libraries. Because
That's my
heard
impression.
I've read articles about it, but I'm just curious if people have, you know, because I'd be interested if there's a library, for instance, in the state, I'm just making this up, who normally gets 10, are they getting 30? Are we seeing sort of a general leap like that across the state?
Well, the numbers, I do know that the numbers, again, not specifically Virginia, but the numbers released by ALA last month as part of their thing was that it is an unprecedented, it was 700 some challenges nationwide. And it's the not quality, but the statistics of the challenges have changed. They have seen groups of things. This has to be removed rather than in these old books. And so that also has increased the numbers. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from my other Virginia colleagues, which I haven't talked to them this year about.
Well, the year's not over. Yeah.
That's right.
But I mean, it does sound like 6 is a lot when you take the consideration that you're talking about with each title and with each case. So it's not something that you're just saying, oh, no, this is whatever, we're not going to talk to you. So.
Yeah, it does take a good amount of staff time when we do this, but it's a useful exercise every time we do it because it does allow us to, you know, look at a section of the collection.
That's why my question turned into 4.
I also had a comment or an observation, I think, with the ruling by the Virginia legislature on schools having to come up with a particular policy for book approval. That and they're struggling, you know, to define sexually explicit content. Here we go again. But that may spill over into it's easier. And they're more involved, I think, in their school, and they have a cadre of information and people and principals, you know, keeping them for you know, teaching groups or whatever. So it might see a little bit of a disturbance until it gets kind of settled in the policy, because the superintendents of Virginia have to establish a policy, so that will be input, and I'm sure a lot of things will come out, but may be obviously very separate from the public library sphere for now. I hope.
And I think going back to what many of you have said and going back to this question is that, and speaking of the policy, is that to go back to the material selection policy, which we have, and it's a very strong, robust, hopeful policy to guide our decisions on what goes into the collection. Generally, in those informal conversations we have when someone questions, why does the library have this? When we show them, well, these are the things we took into consideration, and this is why we think it fits in the collection. Generally, that policy backs up a decision to include it.
Because I've had several questions from people in the community asking, well, how does the book get chosen? They, you know, sometimes there's this abstract library all up in the sky kind of thing.
Stare into my cauldron and
Yeah, right. No, I like this, or I like that. And so it is, and one thing that I thinking, because I had to question is having that policy firm and available and up to date, because for a while I think like everybody just assumed everybody understood that, you know, that how circulation and selection works, and not so. And
right.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think our frontline staff are good at having that conversation as well, of saying, this, you know, for everybody, and where we get those decisions. Absolutely. I was just looking at when that material selection policy. That's located in
That's
2019.
reviewed, yeah, so it's gonna get reviewed at some point.
It's on Mike's calendar.
Yeah, I think I just heard 2018, so that puts me out.
Under update 2019, so
I'm pretty sure that
that was
was
just
just inserting new language about reconsideration specifically,
right.
which we did when we.
That was around, when that whole reconsideration. Yeah.
So I attended a panel at VLA shortly after the award ceremony for Library of the Year, and a couple of takeaways. It was in this territory, and there was a couple of takeaways that dovetailed with something you said. I'll share them, and they were things that stuck with me. They said, make sure you have a robust reconsideration policy, and that staff are trained in being able to point people to that. So I presume that's the case. Certainly heard some of the things that I would have wanted staff, but it's the question, does everyone know that? I assume that's the case, but that's, you know, David's job. The one takeaway was, keep in mind that patrons, some of them just want to be heard. So that might be half the battle, regardless of what you end up deciding. If you make them feel that way, that they were heard, and that there is a, you know, a rationale behind everything you're saying, you know, dovetails with that. But this also came out from this panel, so I thought I'd share that. They also said, and this is interesting to me because there was a lot of kind of like agreement and nodding in the room, we should acknowledge that it's okay not to like stuff, to like things and not to like things. And so that shouldn't be, and again, it's not anything I heard, that shouldn't be part of our response, is that, oh, you know, you're wrong for having concerns about things. You should accept that various people aren't going to like different things, but again, our solution is we're having all of the above broad approach. And again, I think that's the right tack. So I had noted this down mentally to share with as part of this. One logistical question: I'm not seeing the form, or I wasn't able to quickly find the form on the website. So if someone did have these concerns, it it seems to me almost like they have to come into the library and talk to a person. And so maybe we could, there's a balance because you don't want to encourage frivolous input, but you want to, make sure, accommodate whatever way that people might have this feedback. So that might be a point to take.
Absolutely.
You,
I'll take a look at
and
that.
maybe it is there and I didn't find it in 30 seconds of
Off the top
looking.
of my head.
That's actually something that came up at the last time we had somebody that was unable to come into the library. We emailed them the form. They brought it up to a staff member and we emailed the form to them. It is an extra layer. Currently, the policy or procedure says that the form is available in our branches.
I
So that
remember
would be
that from
something to
when we were.
And
Do
then
we have a concern though about people sort of just bombing your form?
that's right. So
I
there's
mean,
a
we
balance.
wouldn't-
Yeah, there's a balance.
There's time to be taken up by trying to figure out.
I believe we only accept challenges from
Card
cardholders, is that
So you
true?
would have to- It does ask for the library card number.
Yeah, but if you put a giant advertisement on the homepage and it's, would you like to challenge your book today? You're gonna get more, right? So I agree, there's about you, but I'm just saying, people who might have this idea, we want to make sure they know how to.
Yeah, I'll take a look. I mean, the form itself requires some thought. I mean, you can't, it's not just like submit a title and press go. Like you have to explain what it is that you're wondering about and whether you've read it and.
Right,
things like
we
that.
don't actually ask that anymore. We used to ask if you've read the entire book, but we don't ask that when the form was updated.
Oh, because
to-
now it's a
Yeah.
multi,
Oh, because it's not about the book.
it doesn't necessarily, it's not
Not just
necessarily a
book.
book.
Exactly.
And
Go ahead.
I could-
Interrupt. Broke your train of thought.
Yeah, you did, well, my head. Oh, no, I was gonna say that, when you do that, make the, procedure, obviously, the idea is to get interaction with a real person. So even if when you put it on, that's gonna hopefully be part of it to call Meredith first, or, yeah, but just because I understand I used to do that, when you want to get somebody in when they're planning, and it would be, you have to come. Of course, you really didn't have to come, but because you want that interaction, and then a little ways down, if you cannot, you know what you want. But I see you want that, because as you said, some people just want their opinion voiced, and you want to share the information that they need to have.
Yeah, so it does allow them to know that they've received the information like the guidelines, the material selection policy. But just to iterate what Mike said is that in our training, which is required as part of all employee onboarding or orientation, does get training in this procedure. And my way of training is that the first thing we say is thank you. Not a lot of people take the effort to talk to library staff about how they think about library offerings. Welcome those conversations when they happen in any way. And yes, the stressing that if this is not for you, we have other things so that again, okay, well, you didn't like that. Let me find something that you do like.
Well, I think saying thank you for giving us this information because people, that kind of brings down the temperature. And so, because they might say, oh, how dare this library have this? But then they would come to you and say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. And I think that kind of cools them down and so that, okay, you can have a conversation. And so it's not all this passion going on here.
I think you said this right at the beginning, and I already have forgotten. How many years do you normally go through and evaluate each thing we have? I mean, it's 500,000 things, so it's kind of boggling my mind.
Wow.
But you said
Yeah, I sit and spend 5 minutes with every book. So I'm kidding. It's much easier for the picture books. For the science books. We have different libraries that do this differently, and we have a 2-year rotating schedule as a goal to look at the entire adult collection, That's what I can speak for. We're about to start scheduling children's session. Every branch has its own pace at which they look at their own collection, because it is an effort, mostly among branch staff to look at their active collection with guidance from regional managers. The goal would be you look at the entire collection every 2 years, so that doesn't identify something. Sometimes we stretch out to 3 years. Recent COVID times completely changed our circulation numbers and our usage patterns, so we're
A little harder to
Yeah.
say, nobody's really checking
Yeah,
out
but
15 years and.
But every couple of years, we hope to look at each section.
Because I guess it's kind of important to understand that we are not the Library of Congress, so it's not our job to keep a copy of every book ever published. It's our job to have a library that's useful to us.
Exactly.
And so we can't bring in exciting new authors because we're like, oh, we have to keep 8 copies of every Agatha Christie or whatever, I'm just saying. But then we can't, you know, you have to sort of say, well, yeah, what's our limited space until it's.
Yeah, what's useful and appealing to our current readers,
Right.
what reflects our current society.
Right.
The one case in the last several years of a request for consideration where we did end up removing the book was a situation of we hadn't gotten to that section yet that year, but if we had, it would have been removed for reasons of content and age.
Okay.
That we already had a more up-to-date version of that topic.
Right.
And someone brought it to attention that we hadn't gotten it yet. So it was great. So there is a natural flow of in and out in the library, and this helps us keep track of it.
Is this connected at all to the must-be? Like the must-be is that category that they use to kind of evaluate books? Is this what you're describing, or is this something separate?
The must-be is part of our weeding. That's what the part of the crew manual,
Yeah.
which is part of my weeding training.
Yeah.
And weeding would be just the general.
Mhm.
And the crew stands for continuous review, evaluation, and weeding of library materials.
Mhm.
And it does have the must-be criteria, which are things that are misleading and ugly and superseded and trivial and irrelevant and available elsewhere. I feel like I've just passed my collection development test. And those are some of the criteria we look at as this item is no longer useful to our community or no longer has earns its place in the collection.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Meredith, thank you. That's great. I had no idea, even library nerd that I am, that we balance the collection that way by moving books from perhaps one branch to another. That's very interesting. Any other questions for Meredith? Other than, what are you gonna do on your birthday?
Yeah, happy birthday and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I blame it on David that we don't have.
Notify in advance because I love cake.
We had a quorum, in-person quorum if there was.
Right.
Would have been easier.
Tony would have complained, though.
Yeah, that's right, right. Moving on, committee appointments and reports. The first is the report from the library name working group.
Yes, 2 things to report from the working group. One is that the survey of JMRL library staff on JMRL's value and name feedback has closed. The working group will have to meet to discuss that. And then also at 7 p.m. tomorrow, October 25th, there's going to be a Zoom meeting between JMRL's library name working group and a trio of local experts. The working group will be asking a series of questions designed to help understand the process that the 3 organizations these experts represent have used for self-reflection, with the understanding that JMRL's board does not have the ability to change the name of the library. These experts are Frank Dukes, formerly of Charlottesville's Blue Ribbon Commission on Race, Memorials, and Public Spaces, Karen Waters, Director of Community Education for the Albemarle County Public Schools, and Phyllis Leffler, Professor Emerita of History at UVA and a consultant to the university's Naming and Memorials Committee. So a link to view live can be found at jmrl.org/library name, and the session will also be recorded for later viewing.
Great.
And when was that due? Tomorrow?
7 o'clock tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yes, October 25th.
And
Thank you.
since it's really informational
Yes.
and sharing information and perspectives. Do we have any obligation to share this with our governing boards?
To me, it's like a committee meeting with some outside experts that we are recording, and it's going to be publicly available for anybody who would like to see it. So any member of the,
Because I think it's invaluable for them, everyone, not just them,
Yeah.
but, you know, to be able to get current information and preceding decisions and discussions and consideration.
Sure. Tomorrow, the goal of the working groups meeting with the experts tomorrow is to hear about the process that each of those three organizations went through. Yes.
Good.
Any other questions on that? Next up, policy committee report.
Okay, the policy committee met today and talked about, mostly about the policy 1.261, public comment at library board meetings. We're just reviewing in light of our recent experiences, whether there are some kind of loopholes or vague aspects of the current policy. And we came away with, we looked at comparable policies from our local jurisdictions, but also some libraries around the state that David had reached out to. And we came up with sort of a bullet list of things that we want to cover. And we're gonna, between now and the December meeting, work those into a draft for the policy committee to look at, and then eventually come back to this board with some suggested improvements. So I do think from the meeting today, it's fair to say we probably will be presenting something to the board
In December.
Probably in December, yes. But as opposed to, are we going to leave the current policy as is? Probably we're going to have, you know, anytime you look at something, you find a way to improve. So I think that will happen in December or subsequently. We also started a discussion of policies 2.1 and 2.11, which are the Public Employees Code of Ethics and the Library Employees Code of Ethics. We had sort of tabled these. They're about a year late in the review schedule because we wanted to work these into the employee handbook process. And so now we've seen how that ended up, and we're looking at whether to have these policies or what they should include. Also, the Public Employees Code of Ethics in particular is based a lot on parts of the Charlottesville City employee manual. What's the document that changed?
Previously, the employee handbook, which they are no longer using.
Yeah, but they've just released some
Personnel policies.
personnel policies, which really just last week, I think.
Right.
So we're looking at those and deciding what to adapt from them to kind of highlight for our own employees. So I think we just got started with that, so I don't think by the end of December meeting we would have anything finalized, but probably 2 meetings from now, I suppose in February, we might have something to present to the board on those. But otherwise, nothing there's no new finished products to present to the board today. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike on the policy committee? Okay. Report on JMRL's annual pre-budget meeting with the jurisdictions.
Yes, so this meeting was 2 weeks ago, and representatives from Albemarle, Louisiana, and Charlottesville were in attendance. We couldn't get everybody there. We have this meeting annually. It's written into the regional agreement to meet in October, basically around before October 15th, to share expectations and very early discussions about what JMRL's next fiscal year is going to look like, and to hear back from jurisdictions about what their very early projections are. So I shared the library board's budgeting priorities from last month, including the outreach options that we're going to be discussing with Louisa County and Nelson County, year 2 of JMRL's minimum wage adjustments, and a funding for a cost of living increase. And then we heard considerable concern from all jurisdictions in attendance about the threat of a coming recession and the impact the end of federal relief funds will have on their local budgets. So it's very early to tell, but I will say just the tenor of this meeting was a bit more pessimistic than in the last few years, just in terms of what the expectations are from each of the jurisdictions about their own needs next year and then what their revenues are going to be. So we'll be talking about this in the budget process here, which I'll talk about, and probably I guess I'll report for Kathy because she's not here for the personnel committee as well. At any rate, any questions about that meeting? It was between Krista and I attended, and the two members of the budget office of the city of Charlottesville, and Ashley, who's on the call today, was there with Chrissy Hamill from the city of Charlottesville's budget office, and then Christy Goodwin from Louisa County was there as well.
Very good. So next up is the Personnel Committee report.
So I will report for Kathy, who is the chair of the Personnel Committee and couldn't be with us today. The Personnel Committee met and discussed the 14 requests for new or expanded personnel costs across JMRL's branches and departments, and they came up with a prioritized list of 10. So out of those 14, 10 of them they thought were worth the Budget Committee discussing for possible inclusion in JMRL's fiscal year 24 budgets, and within that 10, they had the top 2, which they considered to be must-have requests, and then the rest of them are in priority order. Those are included in the board's handouts posted to the webpage. So that's actually the next item to discuss.
How does that work? That's very good. Any questions about that before we talk about the operational budget requests? Okay. David, segueing.
So I will actually pop these up from your handouts. And even maybe make them big enough for people to read. So these are the recommendations from the Personnel Committee to the board to consider for the Budget Committee to consider for the fiscal year 24 budget. So Wendy will call a meeting of the Budget Committee in November. They'll look at all the operational costs. They'll look at the minimum wage adjustment. They'll look at the numbers that are already kind of, here's what we know we're going to ask for. And they will take a look at these personnel requests to see what we think is palatable and manageable for our partners. The top 2 requests here, the first one are for hours, 6 hours to 2 positions at the Bookmobile in order to bring Bookmobile service to Louisa County and to Nelson County. So Alita and I will be talking with Nelson County about this, and Wendy and I will be talking with Louisa County about this. These don't have other operational effects on the other jurisdictions. So the jurisdictions in question can look at those as basically here is the cost it would be to bring this service to our county. And they can make some decisions there. The second priority is for a new branch specialist position at Gordon Avenue. And this is because of the capital project to add a drive-through to the Gordon Avenue branch. Currently, there is a book return on the Ackley Lane side of that building. And there's a capital project between the city and the county to turn that into a service desk where people could pick up materials out the window here. So that project is moving forward. As far as we understand, I do know that a lot of capital projects are running into some issues across all of our jurisdictions, just with inflation and costs being greater than they anticipated when they were making these plans. This one, currently, we're still expecting to happen, maybe even beginning this fiscal year. So at that point, the Gordon Avenue branch would need another dedicated staff member to help manage that. Go ahead.
Was that prompted or, considered or boosted from the COVID? And using that money because it facilitates easy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Wendy. I do not believe that this was looked at as a kind of CARES or ARPA funding from these 2 jurisdictions. This was something that JMRL has in our strategic plan to talk about based on the success of the drive-through here at the Northside branch. You know, so we have been talking with Charlottesville and Albemarle about this for several years, and they had placed a capital project in that's supposed to come up this year.
And I don't understand how you allocate monies from one category to capital improvements, but I just wondered, was there any way to access some of the money from the COVID response?
Well, the jurisdictions would have to make that call. JMRL
Yeah.
didn't get any
I just wondered
COVID
if that
funding.
helped them. I mean,
Yeah, it's possible. I think in the sense that that's helping pay for some other things maybe that would free up some funding to help with this project. I don't know that it's going to come in over what they're expecting. I'm just guessing. I'm just being a pessimist. I can hear AJ behind me telling me to be more positive. I'm assuming that some of those costs might come in a little high. But we are expecting that project to happen, and they are going to need more staff in order to manage that new service. So both of these are new services, and they're requests for new operating funds. And the rest of them, every one of the 14 requests that came into the personnel committee were all valuable and important things that would help support what JMRL is doing. But the budget committee and the personnel committee both are going to have to make some decisions about what to prioritize here.
Isn't it, as I look at this?
Yeah.
It's not the case that ultimately the jurisdictions are either gonna, most of what I'm seeing here are jurisdictional costs. Is that true?
Yeah, the only ones that are shared costs regionally are the 10 more hours per week for a courier position that was added. Last year, it was moved up from, I believe it was 16 hours up to 30. And then I believe that's the only one that made the top 10 that is a shared cost. Now, quite a few of these, if it's Gordon, Northside, or Central, it's shared between Charlottesville and Albemarle. But for Nelson, Louisa, and Green, the only new cost here would be the 10 more hours for the courier, or should Nelson or Louisa choose to add some of these outreach services.
So I'm just, in my mind, maybe you tell me if I'm thinking about it the right way. Yes, these are all part of a consolidated budget, but ultimately each jurisdiction is going to say, yes, we can fund this full amount, or you're going to have to do with something less. And we're making those cases kind of individually. But here's why this is our priority and why it benefits your jurisdiction.
We'll be asked to stand up in front of either their board or their staff and explain, you know, what kind of value this is going to give back to the community for each one of those. And you're right in the sense that, you know, Albemarle is not going to have too many concerns about the additional bookmobile hours in Louisa, you know, and Louisa is probably not going to have too many concerns about the children's specialist position at Northside. So we will tailor those discussions to each jurisdiction as we're talking to them.
David, and that you don't ask for all of it. And they may say no to all of it if you ask. You say, I want 20 more people, and then they go, no, we can't have any people. Instead of saying, can we have 3?
I just,
you could get them to ease into that.
to Mike's point and to the point that Meredith, you made during the personnel committee meeting, is that we'll want to be able to provide justification and data to all of our jurisdictions about why there's this need there. And as always, the library is not competing with itself, especially when it comes to new positions. We're competing with every other department or division for every jurisdiction. It's you know, a new position for the library means saying no to a new position in the fire department. Well, those are factors that are outside of our control, right? So Tony, what I'm seeking is either a motion or a consensus from the board to pass these along to the budget committee for consideration for inclusion in the proposed budget, which should be ready for you all to review in advance of the November meeting.
Do I hear a motion to move that forward to the budget committee?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Liz.
Move things forward.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The upcoming regional agreement review committee meeting. Why, look, that's David again.
Okay, well, full of info. So it is written into the regional agreement that there is a 5-year review process that was last held in 2017. And so it is time to do again 5 years ago, this was done in kind of a perfunctory fashion, along with that pre-budget meeting that I just described. I think of it as like the Godfather, the heads of the five families. They were all together and discussed some issues and decided not to talk about that.
They have money. All
The,
the families have money and the library does.
At that time, there were a few issues that were discussed, but there was no decision made to make any amendments to the regional agreement. So no changes were made then. And it was all kind of, everybody was pretty happy where they were and nothing moved on past that point. So during the pre-budget meeting a few weeks ago, I discussed the process with that group. And they felt that in the spirit of the agreement, that they should review in the spirit of the regional agreement, which says every 5 years, you need to look at this thing, that we should have a separate meeting in order to do so. So I'm currently accepting any feedback from the jurisdictions prior to a regional agreement review meeting that's going to be held on November 3rd. And that's just going to be the jurisdictions and myself. I'm accepting any input that they have now for things that they want to discuss at that time. They asked what JMRL wanted, and I mentioned that previous JMRL boards were on record asking for removal of the out-of-area fee. That has been a topic of discussion that the board previously has brought up to the jurisdiction. So that will be discussed, I'm sure. Administratively, JMRL is interested in cleaning up some of the language around the equipment fund. This came up when the policy committee was looking at our equipment fund policy last year. And also as the library board considers a possible fine-free future, as many libraries are doing, the language around the equipment fund is very tied into that. So it would be maybe figuring out a way to make that future-proof. And also administratively, JMRL is interested in discussing the carryover cap on operational funds that we have. Currently it's 5%. I would be interested in a reasonable extension of that number, but ultimately that would be up to the jurisdictions as well. What they would consider to be a reasonable carryover annually. So I do not know, Tony, if this is going to be the first of many meetings or a single meeting. It will be up to the jurisdictions involved, depending on if they have amendments that they would like to consider.
I see. So do we anticipate that this process probably will go into 2023, calendar year 2023?
I think it has a high potentiality for that, but I won't know until this meeting on the 3rd of November.
Okay, great. Any questions about that? Any comments moving forward with that?
Committee in this case is not the trustees at all, or not on.
No, I'm sorry. Yes, you're asking the makeup of the committee?
Yeah, so you're talking about the jurisdiction.
Yes, it's spelled out in the regional agreement that there is one representative from each jurisdiction and the library director there to provide the supporting information that they need. So it'll be one person from each of the 5 jurisdictions.
Meredith, to go back to the earlier topic about budget, and very often when the budget is formally presented to the city council, the board of supervisors, David will ask one or more trustees to go with him to those meetings to present, the budget request, especially if we're asking for more funds, that kind of thing. Just make a short public comment.
Last year.
I think there's the potential that the jurisdictions would decide as part of this that they want to open this up to more participants, in which case, probably start with Tony and figure out who from the board would be interested. But I don't know that. We'll see after we meet with the jurisdictions on November 3rd.
Okay. Old business, we have a potential vote on the bylaws, which was amended policy 1.21. Mike or David, would you like to refresh our memory on that one?
Sure. So the only change here is to reflect the new remote participation policy that you all enacted in August, I believe. So it's removing some language and basically saying this other policy. And the bylaws have to be read in 1 month and then voted on the next month. You all read these in September, so you could vote today if you like.
Just as an aside, and this doesn't bear on the vote at all, I saw in the Albemarle County legislative priorities, for the new calendar year, that one of the priorities was to allow for all virtual meetings of public bodies. So the county's going to bat for all virtual meetings, which I think is good. All right, are we ready to vote on this change that we looked at last month? If so, could I have a motion?
I move that we accept the new wording of section 6.
I second that.
All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. Now, I can't imagine he has anything left to say, but the library director's report is next.
I'm sorry, I really do hate to be talking the whole time during your meeting.
Better you than me.
I mean, honestly, this is why we're here.
To hear me. I believe you all should have gotten in your trustee emails next week a new state newsletter that they're putting together from the Library Development Division. Last Wednesday it went out. This is going to be a monthly one-stop shopping information for trustees around the state. So I'm really looking forward to this resource because I know you all get a lot of individual emails from the state library, from VLA, from various other resources. So Reagan Thalacker is working on this, and it should give you once a month a listing of any, if there was going to be a change that would affect the state law, or if there were going to be trainings that were coming up for trustees. I'm hoping this will sum it up nicely for you. So be on the lookout for that new newsletter. The first issue went out last week. Sorry.
On the 19th. Okay.
Good. Mike mentioned the new personnel policies from the city. So these just were sent to council to review last week, although they are official at this point. This is a long time coming. The city HR has been working on this for a very long time. It is a big document, but I'm working my way through it because, as you all know, JMRL uses the personnel policies of the city when we don't have an explicit policy in place to cover something. So one thing that it includes that has been a staff request to me for a while that we have not had before that I think that the board should probably vote on. So I'd like to add this as an agenda item next month for you all, Tony, is a sick leave bank. So the city is going to add one and we'd have to figure out how to make it work on our end, but I think we could. So it'd be somebody in need of some sort of long-term leave for some sort of medical reason that uses their own leave. You'd be able to donate. I think the city's policy says up to 4 hours a month of leave to them. So I'd like to bring that proposal to you all next month to discuss. It is in the city's new personnel policies, but since our own leave follows JMRL's, we have our own leave policies. I think it makes more sense for you all to vote on it.
Right.
Okay, so I'll have some more information next month. Great. And Wendy already scooped me on the Friends sale update. So a special thanks to the Friends of the Library, the library board, all the volunteers, Peter Mano for organizing the volunteers, the sale, the physical space, former library board member Peter McIntosh for being there every day, counting all the money. And it was a tremendously successful sale. And it ensures that fiscal year 24, JMRL will be able to put on some of the best programming in the state. So, yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yes. Yes. I think Peter Mano is taking a 3-day rest.
And he was not feeling well going in, but he rallied.
He rallied. Thank Mike and Alita for attending the Virginia Library Association awards banquet, at which JMRL accepted the Library of the Year award. Thanks also to Kayla Payne and Maddie Smith from technical services staff for attending. So I didn't get to stay for the whole conference, but I did tour the beautiful Slover Library in downtown Norfolk. And I think Michael and Alita, you all got to see it too. It's really a crown jewel, a model for what a downtown library can be. So I encourage if anybody is going to be in the Norfolk area to go check that out. I also wanted to congratulate JMRL's reference librarian, Abby Davis, for successfully presenting a BLA session entitled Starting and Scaling Passive Programming for Adults, which she doesn't know yet, but I'm going to ask her to bring back to you all as I continue at some point.
On her birthday.
On her birthday.
On her birthday. Check that out.
And finally, Meredith, Michael, Tony, and I were able to go on a tour of the Alderman Library along with Ophelia Payne, current Louisa branch manager, former Alderman employee. The scope of that renovation is staggering. Really, it was I had compared it kind of to a central library renovation and that it was in a small envelope and it's a very highly trafficked area, but that's about where the comparisons end.
Right.
It's 1 million volumes to move as compared to maybe 130,000-ish for the central branch. 5 floors. They're moving to collapsible stacks, so their shelving will be on a rail, and you can kind of close it in and accordion it out as needed. $160 million price tag, and Central is currently estimated. We're working on capital improvement project submissions for the city and the county, and it's currently estimated a hair under 15 million. But I wanted to thank University Librarian John Unsworth for reaching out to invite JMRL's trustees to join. That is all I have to report.
The only thing I have to mention is that it's no longer called Alderman Library. I know you grew up there, David, but it's now the University of Virginia Library.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It might
I
have
did
some-
spend a lot of time there as a child. And at one point I thought I knew the combination to the vault, but I don't think it was.
They changed it now.
I changed it on you.
I'm sure they
They are also, we saw where they were creating a connector to Clemens. Are they getting rid of Clemens' name? Is it all just easy?
Sure. But I know that there will, I don't know if that will be open 24 hours, but there will be an interior walkway.
Yeah, it truly was mind-boggling, and I think we should just follow the example to redo Central, leave the historic part up, do the inside, close for, what was this, 3 years? Close for 3 years, what the heck? And it really was inspiring, so.
Yeah, and they've had to find room. They build another building on the Ivy Stacks to put those
The
million
books in,
books in.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Other matters? Oh, sorry.
You
Lee,
had
go
something,
ahead.
Tony.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was wondering about the usage of the Slover Library, because the upper floors were closed when we went there. So so basically everything was going on down in that main level, and so I said, wow.
I think they use the upper space for events, or at least some of the upper space when I was there was event space.
There were, I looked at 3 floors. There was the main floor there, and then there was the children's floor, which was right above the main floor. And then I can't remember what the other one was. It might have been nonfiction. And then there was the genealogy and local history section, which is on one side in the old building, and that was all closed to the public. It was open though, but it wasn't, you couldn't just walk in, you had to make an appointment. But I think that had more to do with the rare materials that they have than there were quite a few people in there when I went, which was Wednesday afternoon at like 4 o'clock, and it seemed to be all open. You didn't see the children's area with it had the pad that you could stand on.
The stairs were roped off
Yeah.
behind the, information.
So you missed 2/3 of the tour.
I mean, there were some hours, it said,
Yeah, they
There were some
had
hours
listed
posted.
hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we weren't there during the hours.
Yeah, I don't know if I had to hazard a guess, I would say staffing is the
Right,
issue.
yeah.
But I don't know that. So that's too bad. We'll have to go back.
Anything else you would like to talk about? All right, how about we discuss future agenda items as in November 28th?
I want to remind the board that the November meeting is at the Central Library. This is the first of the 4 field trips this fiscal year.
So not much of a hike, but a little bit of a hike. So. So we will have another library name working group report as an agenda item, I'm sure.
There should be a budget committee report as well.
Right, correct?
And then there should also be a vote on the proposed budget in November.
Very good.
So it's crucially important. Lisa saved the day today to get a quorum, but it's crucially important in November that we get a quorum. So I'll be bugging everybody a lot in the week ahead of that
I
meeting.
may have jury duty.
Ooh.
Can I get out to say that David needs?
Need a note from
I know, I think I know that judge, but
You gotta be there.
So
Well, just
David?
take your notepad and say, oh, I'm doing this right now.
Oh, yeah, you're not allowed to bring your phone in.
I'll be interested in, I'm sure everyone will, in an update from whatever happened in the early part of November with the regional agreements. I don't know if that's an agenda item or just part of your report.
Basically, Mike, we turn David on and let him talk, so that.
But you tell them what you want to hear first.
I would like to add at least a discussion on that leave bank. So if we don't, hopefully I'll be able to present something that makes sense to you all. You can consider it and maybe vote on it, but if not, vote on it the following month.
Very good. Okay.
I think if there are problems or questions with it, we could always kick it back to the personnel committee to discuss.
Okay. Any other things we need to have on the agenda? Trustee continuing education will be, we were looking for a presentation, but probably not in November. David, you had mentioned bringing the VLA presentation.
Yeah.
Reference librarian.
We could do that. I have to find out when Abby's birthday is, but.
Right. Yeah, it's very important.
So you're suggesting hold off on the,
Let's you and I take a look at it when we
Okay.
formulate the agenda, see how many things are on the agenda and so forth.
Okay.
Anything else? Great. Well, thank you everybody for making a quorum, and those of us who are stuck at home, we really appreciate it. And we will see you all next month if somebody makes a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
Tony.